Turn it up, now we're back on air. Big games, big takes, yeah, we're going there. From the first hot mic to the final call. Nard Dawg Sports Show, talking ball. Headlines hitting, yeah, the day moves fast. We call the big shots, then we double back. From the fight nights, fairways, brackets too. Football Sundays, we're riding through. Win or lose, we still bring the heat. Talk it loud, keep it sharp, no retreat.
It's the Nard Dawg Sports Show, where the ball takes roll. Game time, prime time, let the whole thing go. Yeah, the Nard Dawg Sports Show, coming fast, talking goal. From the kickoff line to the final show.
All right, guys, we are back. It is part 2 of the SEC football preview for 2026. We have 7 teams remaining. In the first part, we did Florida Gators, Tennessee Vols, South Carolina Gamecocks, the Auburn Tigers, Missouri Tigers, Vanderbilt Commodores, and then the bottom 3 of Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. So we've got 7 teams left tonight, and really kind of the cream of the crop in the SEC. I think the top of this league is as interesting and fiercely competitive as any in the country. I'm really interested to see if we all gravitate towards the same 1 or 2 teams out of this group of 7 in terms of, the top 7 favorites, or if we have some difference of opinion here. But Ryan, I know you did some editing and some rewatching of the part 1 of the SEC. Anything kind of stand out to you as we look towards the top of the league now?
Not a ton that stuck out. I would say that for that being the bottom of the league, it was pretty interesting overall. It is a lot more interesting than the bottom of the ACC or the bottom of the Big 12. As an episode as a whole, I think it was completely fine, but I don't think it has nearly the interest of what the top half of this league will have. I mean, every single team has storylines and interest and question marks and a lot of pieces that are being brought back. So I'm excited to get into this one.
Yeah, for sure. The quality of brands, though, that we talked about in part 1, after those first 3 of Arkansas, Kentucky, and Mississippi State, you start getting into Auburn and Florida and Tennessee. I mean, teams that have won national championships in the last 25 years, right? Now they're in that, I guess, the 8 to 13 range in the SEC conference. So, Marsh, looking at the top 7, is there any team that stands out to you as a team you're particularly excited to talk about, or a team that you are particularly concerned about talking about because it's just really hard to get a read on what direction you think their season's going?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I look at these top 7 teams as a whole. I don't feel like I have the same conviction that I would in a normal year in the SEC by picking a team that's going to win. I think there's a lot of parity in the SEC this year. I think you have the Georgias and Alabamas of the world that are coming more down to earth from where they have been in the past. And you've got teams ascending as well, like your Texas A&M, LSU and what Kiffin does, and even Ole Miss and Oklahoma. So I think it's just a very weird scenario for the SEC. Excited to talk about all the differences and kind of get into it. But again, a lot of portal work for these top 7 teams too. So I feel like there's going to be some things that just feel different than what we've seen typically from your Nick Saban era type Bama teams. No team really jumps off the page to me in particular as far as a clear front runner or a level of excitement outside of some of the more funny storylines what we can get into with SEC media days, and Lane Kiffin always brings some sort of ridiculousness with him to some extent too. So I'm excited to jump into it.
Let's do it. That's a good transition. Let's jump right into the LSU Tigers, the Bayou Bengals, led now by Lane Kiffin. He comes down south from Ole Miss, and he is now at the helm of LSU. This is by far and away the biggest coaching headline of the offseason. I mean, Ryan, I know you got Michigan and Whittingham, and that's a really good, solid hire, but Lane is the sexiest hire of this past cycle, and I don't think there's any question about it. Do you?
No, he's definitely a way sexier hire, especially within the conference.
Yeah. Looking at what Lane has done in his very short time in Baton Rouge so far. Brought in a ton of transfer portal talent. Looks like they got a pretty good high school recruiting class, or they were able to hold on to a pretty good high school recruiting class as well. Still have some holdovers like Whit Weeks from last year's team. So should be a very interesting and hard to predict team. Difficult schedule, but what do you see out of LSU this year? I guess, are you predicting something along the lines of right where the expectations are? I think their over-under is about 8.5, so like a 9-3, 8-4 type season. Or are you thinking they could go way above or way below that?
I think I'm pretty in line with where Vegas is on them. Vegas seems to be pretty high in them overall. They're only plus 160 to make the college football playoff, which I think seems about right. I'm excited. I love Lane Kiffin. I love characters like him in college football. People like him is what makes it absolutely great, entertaining every week. He'll get on Twitter. He'll fire off tweets at other coaches. Just the stuff he does just makes it fun. And it's really going to come down to, you mentioned it, the guys he brought in. Can Sam Leavitt be a guy that can lead them to the playoffs? I think he can be. I really do. There's plenty of talent on the outside. LSU's always going to have playmakers. And Lane Kiffin's the guy that's going to know how to use those playmakers. So I think they brought in a quarterback that is good enough to get them to the college football playoff and have them right there competing with every team in the SEC.
Marsh, look, we're going to find out right away, right? It's Clemson to open the season. Then you got Louisiana Tech, which should be a pretty easy win. Then they go on the road back to Oxford, Mississippi to take on Ole Miss, Trinidad Chambliss, and then Texas A&M at home. So, in their first month of the season, their first 4 games, they have 3 games against teams that were either in the playoffs last year or the year before. So what do you make of this kind of opening slate, the opening month of the season? Give us a prediction, I guess, on LSU heading into October. Where are we at? How are we feeling about them?
Yeah, listen, LSU, it all starts with Lane Kiffin. And the fact that he did Ole Miss as dirty as he did, now granted, more opportunity at LSU, more history, more money, all the things. But just Lane Kiffin in general, I got to touch on, because the guy is like, the best way I can put it is he's the most hilarious scumbag, I think, on planet Earth. Paul Feinbaum even said something along the lines of like, Lane Kiffin's on social, posting these things, making it sound like he's some funny dude, but he's actually super socially awkward. He's more of an introvert. But then you see some of the stuff that he does, like taking these jobs, and it always seems to be a circus and how he does it. And somebody had said when he was leaving Ole Miss to get on the plane to come to LSU, people were chasing him down like to the airport, a lot of F-bombs, birds flying, etc. And I mean, it's just, the guy's pure entertainment, and a lot of times it's not even his intention. I think he's just one of those polarizing figures in college football based on his history. So I love that he's coming to LSU. I think he brings back a little bit more of an aura that LSU has been missing. I mean, listen, Brian Kelly has been a squid and fake accent and all that other stuff that really, that guy's just a loser, and I think everyone's come to grips with that. But Lane Kiffin coming in kind of brings some heat to this program again. Death Valley's going to be jumping. We know the historic prowess of this program. So Lane is really the top story here, and I am just so excited to see them return to Oxford and what that setting looks like, because you're going to see people throwing stuff on the field. I think they're going to be trying to spit on Lane. There's going to be some serious animosity there, and there's nothing better in college football and huge fan bases with historic programs that are extremely upset about whatever has transpired with the other team.
Yeah, man, the that hotty toddy crowd, the Grove, is going to be electric in week 3 when LSU goes to Ole Miss. I think they've had, even when Lane was at Ole Miss the last few years, they've had some really good games, some entertaining, kind of higher scoring type games, if I remember correctly. And now you add in this vitriol, this true organic hate for Lane and his decision to leave them high and dry at the end of last season. it's going to be just pure theater, right? In Oxford, come mid to late September.
Listen, I think Lane Kiffin, quite frankly, is one of the more overrated coaches in the nation when it comes down to it. He's great at this high flying, up tempo offense, but as a head coach, I think you have to see the more holistic view of the team. And I don't really think Lane gives a shit. I think he's more of, let's score 40 points. I don't really care what kind of stress we're putting on the defense. We're going to score as fast as possible every single time, no matter the game script, no matter where we're at. And I think he's just that selfish of a person.
Looking at the roster makeup, we alluded to, all the transfer portal additions. They've got an experienced quarterback, but looking at some of the I guess question marks, the potential weaknesses on this roster, it appears, based on some of the research that I've done, this isn't a stereotypical defensive backfield. There's not a Tyrann Mathieu, a Patrick Peterson, a defensive back that you can necessarily point to as kind of the all-American stud on the back end of the defense, right? On the offensive side of the ball, between Levitt coming in, they always have, if not one stud running back, then kind of a stable of workhorse backs that they can lean on at LSU. They bring in Jace Brown from Kansas State, and Eugene Wilson from Florida, so they should be pretty good in the receiver room. They've got just an absolute freakazoid and Trey'Dez Green at the tight end spot. So skill position and Lane's play calling, you feel like you should have what you need on offense if that offensive line comes together. And the big addition in the offensive line room this year was Jordan Seaton from Colorado. Deion Sanders not able to keep him out there in Boulder. But Ryan, from a personnel standpoint, are you kind of thinking the same thing in terms of feel good about the front seven, feel good about the skill players on offense, but defensive backs and offensive line seems to be where there may be some areas for LSU to get exposed this year. Is that fair?
Yeah, I feel like you always worry about your line, even when you have pieces coming in. You kind of have to see it on the field before you can really truly believe in it. And then in a conference like the SEC, you pretty much get tested every single week. But I alluded to it earlier. I believe in Lane Kiffin. I think he's proven he's going to find the right guys. He'll find a way to call the right plays, get the guys the ball in the right positions. Where I think he'll address the line, and that'll be fine. The defense worries me a little more, but I was just looking at their scores from last year. They lost a lot of low scoring games where the defense actually kept them in it, and they're pretty good. 13-17 against Oklahoma, 20-9 against Alabama, 24-19 against Ole Miss. So the defense was actually a little better than what I had remembered it being last year. So that even gives me a little more confidence that Lane is going to be able to get it done, because I do think he'll fix that offense very quickly.
Yep. Marsh, any personnel commentary notes that you want to add? Otherwise, let's look at the betting lines and figure out what we like with this team.
Yeah, just a little bit of a quick counterpoint to Ryan. I actually think defense could end up being the strength of this team. And the reason I say that is we know Lane is great at putting points on the board. Casey, you talked about kind of the pass catchers that have come in, but they don't have the running back workhorse that they are usually accustomed to at LSU. We saw what happened last year where if they ran for over 100 yards, they did it in 6 games. They won all 6 games. I think they were 1-6 in games that they didn't rush for over 100 yards. So you're completely changing the offense. You're talking about an offensive line that has to gel, to Ryan's point, no matter how good it looks on paper. But the defense actually held up last year, and they brought in even better pieces this season. So you still have Wet Weeks at linebacker commanding the green dot and really making sure that their continuity's there. But then you bring in Prince Will, the edge rusher from Ole Miss. You bring in TJ Daughtry, who had 98 tackles last season. Ty Benefield on the back end as well. And then, you mentioned, Casey, that they don't really have that star corner where DJ Pickett is going to be expected to elevate into that pretty quickly. But I actually think the defense is more stabilized under Blake Baker. I've seen Blake his days in Miami and his aggressive approach, and I like his style on defense as well. So I think it'll hold him in games early while Lane kind of puts the pieces in place. But ultimately, I think the offense is more of a question mark based on how long will it take to get to Lane standards before it kind of, as long as it doesn't bite them in the ass while they're doing so.
Yep, fair enough. Well, guys, look, I'm gonna open up the kind of my take. I really like this team. I have a little bit of a hold up with Sam Levitt. I didn't love what I saw out of him last year at Arizona State. Now I know he was fighting through some injuries, and I don't think he even finished the season for Dillingham out there in the desert. I watched a decent amount of their game when they had to go to Mississippi State, and he just he didn't look as good without Scadaboo behind him, kind of drawing a lot of attention and bringing guys up into the box to stop him. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about Sam Levitt with the LSU Tigers. I like the over 8.5 at around -110, -115. Out of this group, SEC championship plus 900, 9-1, that Kiffin put something together with the defensive production they got coming back, with Bo Baker coming back, and then with a whole new offense, basically. I really like, a 9-1 flyer on LSU getting to Atlanta and potentially getting over the hump and winning the SEC championship. I don't know that I'd put serious money on that, maybe a little sprinkle, but I do like the over of 8.5. I do think they get to at least 9-3. Ryan, I'll kick it over to you. Out of the betting lines that we're looking at, what anything kind of stand out or anything that you love, or more of a stay away type team for you?
It's a stay away. There's just not much there. I think the 8-9 wins is right where I think they will end up. If I had to choose one, I would choose the over, just because I'm rooting for LSU. I feel like it's a very popular team on those Saturday night games when you just flip on the game. But I'm going to stay away from SEC champ at plus 900 and college football playoff at plus 160. I just don't think there's quite enough juice there.
Marsh, anything that you want to plant your flag on with the LSU Tigers?
No, I'm right there with Ryan. I think the 8.5 number is right on the button. So for me, I don't really see value in that. Listen, we talked about how tough their schedule is. I just talked a little bit about how I think it's going to take some time for this offense to gel. The defense may be able to hold it together in the meantime, but I just don't see this team really getting ramped up to a point where all of a sudden they're knocking off all these top teams. This is kind of a transition year. I don't think Vegas has priced it that way. I think they've priced it as more of a Lane Kiffin shows up, this team is legit. And I don't foresee that happening this season. So I don't want to get surprised either. I've seen Lane Kiffin teams. I've seen them do well. I just am not sold on it in particular. And I think 8.5, that number is just too close to call for me. And I don't think they come out of the SEC. So I'm really just kind of staying away from the LSU Tigers in this one.
Gotcha. All right, guys, well, let's move on from Lane Kiffin's new home to Lane Kiffin's old home. We'll jump to Ole Miss. We'll go to Oxford, Mississippi to talk about the Ole Miss Running Rebels. A national semifinalist last year, got to the Final Four, got clipped by Miami, and just barely missed out on an opportunity to get to Miami and play Indiana in the national championship game. But really kind of a magical season. Austin Simmons kind of starts the season as the Ole Miss quarterback last year, and then I think he gets hurt in the first month or so. Trinidad Chambliss comes in, and they never really look back, right? Chambliss is back. He got an injunction or some kind of exemption. Some local judge basically said, yeah, no, he's playing this year. He will be our quarterback. So he is back along with Kewan Lacey, who I think is, outside of maybe Ahmad Hardy at Missouri and Mark Fletcher at Miami, like one of my favorite running backs in the country to watch. So that's a pretty good 1-2 punch on the offensive side of the ball for Ole Miss to start with. And then I think people are under the assumption that Ole Miss just got completely gutted and rated kind of like an Iowa State did in terms of their roster. That's not the case. Phil Steele has them in the top 40 still of returning production. Now, a lot of that is Chambliss and Lacey, but they still have pieces on offense, on defense, that this is a team that has experience. Not the most experienced team. They did lose some stuff in the portal, but they gained some experience and gained some meaningful production in the portal as well. So, Marsh, I'll come to you here first. Your Hurricanes are the team that took the Ole Miss Rebels out last year. You got to see kind of the terrifying nature of Trinidad Chambliss and Kwan Lacey firsthand going against them to get to the national championship. What do you make of this team this year? And do you think there's a chance for them to get back to that spot or further and be in the national title picture this year?
Yeah, listen, I actually like Ole Miss better than LSU. I think the experience between Trinidad Chambliss and Kawan Lacey is something that can be leaned on pretty heavily. And I love Pete Golding as a coach too. Just a lot of the stuff he said at SEC Media Days, the way he handled the Lane Kiffin situation, the defensive mindset that he brings to the table, super disruptive and fast and very front driven. I like what Ole Miss has done here. I think there's something to be said about all the chaos and turmoil that happened with Lane Kiffin and how seamless the transition was to Pete Golding. Like Pete Golding was invested in Ole Miss. Everyone loved him. They loved what he was doing on the defensive side of the ball. Everyone talks about how great of a guy he is. In these situations, you need something to galvanize the team, and I think Pete Golding has done all the right things to do so. They have to replace both offensive tackles. The wide receiver room took a big hit. But to your point, Casey, it's not like they got rated from LSU. So this team is just in a transition from an identity perspective, from more of an offensive juggernaut to more of a defensive stronghold. But they have the offensive pieces that are super experienced in Chambliss and Kawan Lacey that they can lean on. I think the run game is going to be outstanding. The RPO game will be there. John David Baker taking over for Charlie Weiss Jr. I think he gets the benefit of seeing what a lot of Lane Kiffin did, but also implementing his own brain trust in that scenario too. So I think they take a little bit of what they did last year, amplify it to some extent or tweak it to some extent. But the defensive structure will be more of a foundation for them. And Pete Golding is a great coach, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to this team and seeing how they bounce back from all the nonsense that took place last year.
Ryan, hotty toddy?
I am hotty toddy this year. I was shocked to see that some of their odds are juiced higher than LSU with what they have coming back. I agree with Max. I think the transition was pretty seamless. I like Golding. You have Chambliss coming back. You have Lacey coming back. Those are as impressive as a 1-2 combo as anywhere in the country, really. So I like the over 7.5. Was kind of surprised to see it that low. They do have a tough schedule. That LSU game might be key for whether that hits or not for them. But I like hotty toddy this year. I think they hit the over. I think they get their revenge with LSU. I think that place is going to be the most electric atmosphere of the year early in the season. I can't wait for that game.
Yeah, look, they opened the season Labor Day weekend. I believe they're a Sunday night, but against Louisville in Nashville. That's not an easy game, but that's their Power 4, tougher out-of-conference game. And then you start running down the rest of the schedule. It's LSU in week 3 at home. They turn around, go right to Florida and play John Summerall and the Gators, what should be an improved Gators team. Big letdown opportunity for Ole Miss coming off that Super Bowl type atmosphere against LSU at home in week 3. They get a bye week, then they go to Vandy, Missouri at home, at Texas, Auburn at home, Georgia at home, at Oklahoma, and then their rivalry game, the Egg Bowl, Thanksgiving week. But I mean, geez Louise, with a bye week sandwiched in there, a 9-week period, they played these 8 games: LSU, Florida, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Texas, Auburn, Georgia, Oklahoma. Like, just a gauntlet right there in the middle of the season, starting with LSU and ending with Oklahoma in early November. So, man, they're really going to need to lean on that experience from Chambliss and Lacey and be able to move the ball, score some points. You would think just through attrition that there's probably at least a couple losses on the schedule this year, but who knows? We've seen guys come back like Chambliss and put together magical seasons. Maybe they are the team that gets through the SEC and is in the SEC championship game and, a very high seed in the CFP this year. But let's take a look at their odds. So the national championship, they are 30-1. The SEC championship, they are 11-1. To get to the college football playoff, they are plus 220. To not get to the college football playoff, they are minus 300. The over-under on them is 7.5. And I have to think that some of these odds are a little bit deflated just because of that schedule, that gauntlet that we just went over. Marsh, I'll come to you here. Anything stand out to you on the Rebels futures markets?
Yeah, I like over 7.5 wins. I'm not a fan of the SEC championship or the college football playoff. I think, again, I mentioned a lot of parity in the SEC, but there's parity in college football everywhere, I feel like, this year, not just the SEC. So those odds of the college football playoff as well as the SEC championship aren't as enticing to me. However, over 7.5 wins, I do like. You mentioned the gauntlet that they have. They have this. The first part of that stretch is LSU at home. We know that's Lane Kiffin's return. There's not going to be a team in college football more fired up for a game than Ole Miss on September 19th. And I think that the fact that LSU, Florida, Vanderbilt are all going through transition of some sort as well. So LSU, Florida, Vanderbilt all will have new quarterbacks at the helm. Florida has a new head coach. LSU, new head coach, where they're expecting immediate results. But like I mentioned, I think that takes more of a ramp period for Lane to get the offense where he wants it. I'd rather have LSU early in the season like they do. And then I'm not scared of Vanderbilt. I think Ole Miss has more talent than Vanderbilt does at this point. Missouri doesn't scare me. Texas is probably a loss. Auburn win. Georgia and Oklahoma will be interesting. I think if they can win one between Georgia and Oklahoma, they cover the 7.5. So that's the way I'm looking at this schedule. That's probably the number that I like best.
Ryan, what about you?
I like that over 7.5. I was tempted at 11-1 them to win the SEC, but that schedule really is so brutal. They could lose 2 games and be out of it, and I see 2 losses on their schedule, so I'm not going to pull the trigger on that.
Now, one thing to be cognizant of when LSU comes to town is Pete Golding in a new house yet? Because Lane Kiffin is talking about how he sees what Pete's doing on his ring cameras, the fact that he moved into Lane's old house. And Lane strikes me as a teddy bear Cam kind of guy. I think there's some hidden shit in there, especially in the bedroom. Who knows what he's watching? I would maybe earmark on that one. Let's hope that old Pete Golding has a nice $2 million house under his own belt by that time, so Lane's not snooping around.
Yeah, or has at least had like a tech team come in and do a sweep of the house and get all of Lane's cameras out of there.
Yeah. Lord knows he already had to get the sex swing out. So,
well, yeah. Look, I think for me, this is probably more of a stay away, just given the schedule, and I don't want to fade Chambliss and Lacey. If anything, maybe like a very small sprinkle on the national title would be something I think could be kind of fun at 30-1. They were in the Final Four last year. I love Golding and kind of the direction I think he's going to take this team. This team specifically, I don't know how much I believe in Golding long term past kind of this core nucleus that was there last year and this year. But I do love his toughness, his mindset, the attitude, the culture that he's going to bring to Ole Miss. And then you got a superstar quarterback and a superstar running back on the offensive side of the ball. I think it's a good mix. So, could they catch lightning in a bottle and find themselves back deep into the college football playoff and potentially get it done this year at 30-1? I think that may be worth a small flyer. Everything else I'm pretty neutral on. So we will go ahead and move on to another team down in this part of the Southeast, the neighbors to the east. The Alabama Crimson Tide. We've got year 3 of Kalen DeBoer coming up. They finished the season last year in the quarterfinals against the Indiana Hoosiers, get absolutely boat raced by the Hoosiers out in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl. But they were able to go on the road, win a road game against Oklahoma, that Friday night college football playoff game. Ty Simpson has been drafted in the first round by the Los Angeles Rams. They will have a new quarterback under center. That being said, this feels like it's going to be a vintage Alabama Crimson Tide team under the old regime of Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. The strength is going to be in the defensive side of the ball for sure. And if they can get some good production out of the new quarterback, this could be a very dangerous team. I think Alabama is a program that is now easy to kind of view as down, but they're down from the most dominant program, the most dominant run we've seen in the last 50 years. under Saban. They're still very much a top 10, maybe even top 5 type of program. We were talking about basically a full Kalen DeBoer team. We've been through, I think this would be now like the third cycle of high school and portal recruiting that they've done. So this roster should be much more in his image and likeness than the previous 2 Kalen DeBoer Alabama teams. So Ryan, I'll come to you here first. Where do you see DeBoer taking this? And are we talking about him still on the hot seat following this season, or does he cool things down and get Alabama back on track as a true national title contender this year?
Well, I think that's what he has to do to truly be off the hot seat in Alabama. He has to win a national championship. They don't really accept anything less. They are as crazy as they come. So unless he does that this year, no, he will be on the hot seat for the foreseeable future. Taking the job after Nick Saban you're always going to be judged against him. And he didn't have any classes that went through Alabama that did not win a national championship. So this is DeBoer's 3rd year. I don't think he will get fired after this year, but I think that the seat will get hotter. I'm kind of down on Alabama this year. I do think they'll have a good defense. As far as SEC schedules go, theirs isn't quite as brutal as others. I know it's still tough. It's not quite as easy if Auburn turns out to be as good as I think they are, but Vanderbilt, Chattanooga, Auburn is a decent way to end the season. What are they going to get out of the quarterback is really important. DeBoer always seems to get something. I'm not a big Austin Mack guy. If I'm an Alabama fan, I'd want this Keelon Russell to take the starting job and become the guy, because I do not think they are going to go very far with Austin Mack. I guess I'm judging him by a pretty small sample size, but I'm not a big fan of him.
I think that's a fair take, Ryan. I don't think there's any doubt that there's already some murmurs about Kalen DeBoer's job security down there in Tuscaloosa, and another underperforming season, even if you get to the quarterfinals of the CFP and you get smoked again and you look like you're not even close, that's just not where Alabama fans expect to be. That seat could be anywhere from, pretty warm to burning hot by the end of the season, if he even makes it to next season without getting canned. So, Marsh, let's come to you. Where are you with the Alabama Crimson Tide this year?
Yeah, I think that their entire season hinges on Keelon Russell. And you mentioned Austin Mack, Ryan. I think if Austin Mack wins this job, they lose probably 4 games easily and probably 2 or 3 more, because I don't trust the guy at all. I think he lacks the dynamic aspect that this team needs right now, and Keelon Russell brings that to the table. Now, as a sophomore, obviously Keelon only threw like 15 passes last year, didn't really get much playing time, but he has all the athletic traits. I think he has to take the lead for this team to be relevant. They were so bad last year outside of Ty Simpson. You take him off of that team, they probably lose 5-6 games. Based on what they have on the roster, Keelon Russell really makes the only sense to me as far as bringing that energy, that dynamic ability, the rushing ability. They have to have some sort of playmaker come in, because, listen, Ryan Williams was so bad last year, he had to change his name. And now he goes by Ryan Coleman Williams. I mean, he's trying to avoid the Google search because he only had like 600 yards last season and 4 touchdowns. I just don't see Kalen DeBoer, what he's brought to this program. And we mentioned the hot seat aspect. I'm with you. I don't think he gets fired after this year unless it's egregious and they do lose, 6 games. But I think the defense will hold things together. Kane Womack has done pretty unbelievable job with his 4-2-5 swarm defense, different positions, the bandit, the wolf, the husky, rover, sting, all these buzzwords about a defense. But the premise is really that all 11 people are attacking the ball at all times. So it's kind of fun to watch, especially with the back end talent that they have and the athletic ability of some of these DBs. They got a corner that's 6'4" and is just a freak athlete. So I want to see that defense become more the Nick Saban defense. They came close last year based on how they played. They need to take that leap, and I think Keelon Russell really has to elevate his play and become the go-to guy. The Jalen Hurts, the Tuas of the world. The defense is going to do its job. So with Ryan Grubb at the helm, Kalen DeBoer, The offense really has to make sure that this wasn't just Ty Simpson and the 13th overall pick in the draft. Show me that another guy can come in here and really take this offense to the next level in year 3. Otherwise, I'm out on it.
Which I think is a perfectly reasonable take. I like Alabama. I feel like this is a year where they rebound and get back to, they flex their muscle a little bit in terms of their physicality. I have a pretty good feeling about, I think, what they're going to have on the offensive line. I love that they have kind of a retro badass defensive backfield with, led by Bray Hubbard, but then, outside they got Zabian Brown and Dijon Lee. They bring in Keon Sabb, the safety from Michigan is a transfer into Alabama this year. They've got some athletic linebackers. And Marsh, you mentioned the swarm defense. I think that defense gets them to at least 9-10 wins and probably back in the playoff this year. And we'll see. We'll see kind of what the matchups are from there. But Ryan alluded to it. I think from a SEC scheduling standpoint, they opened the season with East Carolina. They got at Kentucky. They got Florida State, who, they may be kind of the henchman that puts an end to Mike Norvell there in week 3 against the Noles at home. You got Lenore Sellers in South Carolina, then at Mississippi State, Georgia at home, at Tennessee, rivalry game, Texas A&M at home, at LSU, at Vandy, Chattanooga, and then Auburn. So, you look at their road games, it's Kentucky, it's Mississippi State, it's Tennessee, LSU, and Vandy. So LSU was the first team we talked about today. They were the 8th, I guess, power ranked team, but that's their toughest road game, in terms of the preseason power ratings is at LSU. Everyone else is kind of in the bottom half of the league, right? So that's a pretty favorable road slate. You get Georgia at home. You get Texas A&M at home. It doesn't seem to me like there's more than a couple losses on this schedule if their offense is even average. I think the defense will be pretty elite. And I like this team to get to probably at least 10-2. Their over-under is 8.5, so I really like them to get to 9-3. And I like the over 8.5, and I like the CFP yes of plus 165. So that's where I'm at on Alabama. What about you guys?
Yeah, we talk about the schedule here. I actually think it does Kalen DeBoer no favors. And the reason I say that is on paper, outside of that October 10th to November 7th stretch where you get Georgia, Tennessee, A&M, and LSU, you should be winning every one of these games. And if they start to falter, look out, because the Roll Tide fam is going to be all over Kalen DeBoer. He's 20-8 thus far as a head coach at Alabama. They're only 14-point favorites against East Carolina in week 1 at home. Like, that to me is a little scary. But then we talk about now all of a sudden you get to the end of the season in the Iron Bowl and you've got Alex Galesh, who has now probably got Auburn humming, given he's had plenty of time to get that team where he wants mid-season. I don't see it as a walk in the park, but there are a lot of winnable games outside of that middle stretch there. And I think if you see them slip against a South Carolina or Vanderbilt or an Auburn, and that ends up being but one of 3-4 losses, I think Kalen DeBoer is really going to be updating his resume. I'm not on the under only because, to your point, I think Womack will have this defense where it needs to be. I think they can steal one against like a Tennessee or an LSU, maybe even win both of those games. I think they'll probably lose to Georgia and Texas A&M for sure, but those are really the only two that are for sure losses in my books. I think from that perspective, I would probably lean toward the over and say that if Keelon Russell plays the way that I think he's capable of, and if he takes that next step, then that's probably where I would go. But Alabama for me is one of those that I'm really just kind of keeping at arm's length. I don't know that I'll have much action on this team.
Yeah, I'm not going to have any action either. If I had to choose, I would take the under 8.5. I think DeBoer might lose it this year, lose the locker room. A few losses early could send them spiraling.
All right. Well, sounds like I am by far the most bullish. CFP, no, minus 215. Sounds like you guys would probably lean that way over the CFP, yes, of plus 165. But this is a make or break season for DeBoer. I don't know if they hit the under, and they're 8-4 with this schedule. I think there's a fair chance he gets canned. I think if they hit the over, they're at least 9-3, and they're at least, if not in the CFP, kind of right on the outside looking in again, like they were in year one of his tenure. I don't think they necessarily fire him, but they got to at least get to 9-3. I think anything below that is really an abject failure for them this year. So it's put up or shut up time for old Kalen and the Alabama Crimson Tide. That brings us to the Texas A&M Aggies, another team that Marsh's Miami Hurricanes ended their season last year. Miami Hurricanes were really the SEC slayer once we got to the college football playoff. Unfortunately, they ran into a Big Ten team, the Big Boy League, at the very end. But if they could have just kept playing SEC teams, they may never lose again, right, Marsh? No, the Aggies, that was it wasn't a very well played, pretty game in the first round of the playoffs last year, but it was a tight game. It was a highly contested, very physical ball game between two pretty good defenses. I, for one, love Mike Elko, and it's not just because Brian Doherty's brother, Pat, is at Texas A&M, and he's brought Pat along from Duke to A&M with him. Pat is the special teams coordinator. And when I listen to Mike Elko talk, he just seems like the kind of coach that's just down to earth, very transparent, very kind of blue collar, just a football guy, right? A college football coach in the truest sense of the words. So I'm a big Mike Elko fan and supporter. I don't love Marcel Reed and what he brings to the table outside of his running production. I'll pitch it over to Max first on this one, since his team was fortunate enough to take out this team last year to end their season. So Marsh, I'm sure you studied up on the Aggies last year leading up to that playoff game. They bring back some, but add quite a bit of new guys as well. But what do you think about the Aggies? Do you think that they improve or fall off from where they were last year as a first round CFP exit type of team?
Yeah, so with Texas A&M, Marcel Reed coming back is the biggest piece here. I personally am with you, Nard. I think Marcel Reed doesn't really move the needle much for me. I think just in college in particular, having the experience back and having a playmaker like him is obviously a huge plus when it comes to these teams, especially with the portal and kind of the continuity aspect. But I think a lot of what Colin Klein did last year was make it so that there was a very clear read on every play for him. I don't think he's a drop back, see the field, get to his third progression type quarterback. And we saw a lot of that when Miami kind of forced them to make those additional reads in the college football playoff and resulting in them only scoring 3 points. So for me, I don't believe Marcel Reed can get them to the national championship. I do believe that Mike Elko is a great coach, to your point. I just think they have too many pieces to replace. I mean, you look at the wide receivers and Casey Concepcion being gone. They had running back leave as well. Obviously, Cassius Howe. There was just too many massive names that didn't get massive replacements. And I think Isaiah Horton is a great wide receiver. I watched him at Miami. I watched him at Alabama. He's very veteran savvy and knows how to make plays on the ball. He's caught a lot of touchdowns. But he doesn't have that KC Concepcion element, Mario Craver may try to bring to the table in that aspect. But for me, I think Texas A&M is kind of ho-hum, middle of the pack. I think their coaching staff gets them more wins than anticipated. But I look at that 8.5 number, and it's a little scary for me. We can touch more on that. But Mike Elko, huge fan, to your point. Marcel Reed, I'm not convinced is the guy.
Ryan, the way I'm going to pitch it over to you here is, when I'm looking at the coaching staff and kind of what Elko has done this past offseason, they lose Colin Klein. He takes the head coaching job at Kansas State. They're replacing their defensive coordinator as well. But instead of going out and making sexy, splash, expensive hires for the coordinator roles, they decided to promote within. They go with Holman Wiggins on the offensive side of the ball and Lyle Hemphill on the defensive side of the ball. Kind of a surprising move for Texas A&M, the program that they're still paying Jimbo Fisher like $28 million a year, I think. To me, they're the type of program that goes out and gets a Jim Knowles like Tennessee did, right? They bring in kind of a big recognizable name instead of promoting within. I don't think any of us really know a ton about Holman Wiggins or Lyle Hemphill and what their plan is for tweaks and adjustments to the offense or defense, respectively. But Do you like kind of that more, let's promote within, let's build within. We've got a foundation. These guys have been in the system. They've been under these coordinators that have now taken other bigger jobs in other places. Or do you think it was not necessarily the right move for a program that is at this tier and trying to get to even the next tier in college football?
I give Elko the benefit of the doubt. He definitely seems like he has a style of a guy he wants around. I don't think he wants someone that's too splashy. He has a way he likes stuff done, and I think he probably found two guys on his staff that he likes how they did business and just promoted within. I'm confident just because I'm confident in him. I don't think he would just make the hire or accept just an internal hire because that's what was available. I think he's the type of guy that is going to find who he thinks is the best fit for the team. And he obviously thought that the guys that within are best. It can work to his advantage. They've gotten better each year he's been there. I think they continue to do that. I'm kind of on the opposite side of Max. I look at the 8.5 number and I love it. I think that this team starts the season 10-0. I really do. I think they have a tough end of the season with Oklahoma and Texas. I look at Elko. I look at Reed. I think he's going to make an improvement. I think the defense continues to get better. I'm all in on Texas A&M. This is probably the team at the top half of the SEC. I will make the most preseason bets on. I'm over 8.5. I think I'm going to win the SEC at plus 850. I think that's worth a bet. And I think make the college football playoff at plus 154 right now is also worth a bet. So I'm all in with Texas A&M. I think Elko continues to get this program to the college football playoff almost every year.
I like you calling your shot there. Marsh, you had a reaction?
I don't disagree with that. I think the offensive line stability is going to be an issue, but schedule-wise, they've got one of the better schedule setups for sure, and opponents when we look at the SEC schedules. For you to say they start 10-0, Brian, I mean, that's a very viable take. They've got at LSU late September, but then I think until late October, they don't play anybody. So they're at Alabama the 24th, then at South Carolina November 7th, and then Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas to finish the season, which realistically, you got to beat the Alabamas and Tennessees of the world. And to your point, it's going to come down to at Oklahoma, November 21st is going to be a hell of a game. There's probably going to be a lot of implications late in the season in both of those games between Oklahoma and Texas. I think the 8.5 number, you're right. I think get the fact that it's plus 100, it's not even minus odds. Looking at this schedule, I would be in agreement on that. It's worth a flyer to win the SEC too, just because they get their two toughest games, the last two games of the season. So they should really have all the kinks worked out at that point too. But Marcel Reed, you're right. He should take the leap there or go to the next level under Elko. I don't know that I'm a believer in his mental capacity to do so. He's got all the physical traits, but he struggles to see the field, I think. So if Elko can get him to raise the bar on that front, I would be in agreement with pretty much most of what you said.
I think I'm more bearish than you two. I think that they are 6-2 heading into that last month of the season. I think they lose at LSU and I think they lose at Alabama. And then they still have an opportunity. They got the last month of the season to win 4 big games, right? Which would include road kills against Lenore Sellers in South Carolina and then Oklahoma, who we're going to get into next. Then they got to beat Tennessee and Texas at home. You know, that's a really tough last month of the season. If they can get to that month at 7-1, I'd feel a lot more confident in their CFP yes bet of plus 155. I think just chalking up at Alabama and at LSU as wins is dangerous and not something I'd be willing to do. Just given 2 new coordinators, the offensive line, Billy Lucci, I heard him talk when he was down here in Tampa at Media Days a few weeks ago. Sounds like he is very bullish on the offensive line and what they're going to be able to rebuild to protect Marcel Reed a little bit better. So he's pretty dialed in and a very good source on A&M news and takes. So I'll trust him on the offense. But I don't know. Marcel Reed going into Death Valley, going into Tuscaloosa and beating Alabama and LSU. I don't see both of those wins happening, if either of them. So I'm gonna be a stay away for the Aggies. But if I had to gun to my head, I'd probably take that under 8.5 number at minus 120. I think the schedule's tougher than you guys are making it sound on the surface with your kind of more bullish takes here.
Yeah, I think just giving Alabama and LSU as a win is maybe a little ahead of myself, but maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll try that with FanDuel and see if they'll just count those as wins before the season.
All right, guys, let's go to Norman, Oklahoma. We are moving on to the Oklahoma Sooners, Boomer Sooner. We got John Mateer back. We got a very real defensive identity after last year that I think you can really kind of count on. And you knew that eventually that was what Venables and Oklahoma were going to become, was a defense first and tough physical football team, kind of a different style from the Lincoln Riley era Oklahoma Sooners, where their quarterback was winning the Heisman every year. You go from Baker Mayfield to Kyler Murray to Jalen Hurts, and it's just one kind of stud quarterback after another. And now, Mateer is, I think he's a good player, but he's definitely not the first round draft pick type of prototypical quarterback or even dual threat type quarterback that you would see go as a first rounder. So, Ryan, I know you take quite a bit of significant interest in what this Oklahoma team is, given that your Michigan Wolverines are going to lock horns with the Sooners in a revenge opportunity in Ann Arbor, week 2 of the season. You and I will be together for that. But I'm going to kick it to you first, and I'd imagine you've already started looking ahead and looking at what that challenge is going to be for your Wolverines week 2. What do you make of the Sooners, and are your Michigan Wolverines going to extract their revenge against Venables and the Sooners in week 2?
I sure hope so. I think it's all going to depend on John Mateer. He is the heart and soul of that offense. And he absolutely killed Michigan last year. He looked awesome. I thought he was a Heisman front runner after that. He was running, he was throwing. He looked unbelievable. But as the season went on, he did not look quite as good. It seemed like he got a little banged up. Teams started to kind of figure him out, started to make him throw more, didn't give him the opportunities that Michigan did. And I feel like it was somewhat like the book was written on how to stop him. And that kind of leads me to be a little bearish on Oklahoma this year. They have a super tough schedule. I mean, Michigan, New Mexico, Georgia, Texas is just a brutal 4-game schedule. 2 of those games on the road. It's Michigan and at Georgia. So I think it could
Texas is neutral.
Yeah, I think that could be a rough start to the season. I think if it's a rough start to the season, the calls for Brett Venables could happen in Oklahoma. I don't think it's a hot seat by any means right now, but I feel like he needs to have another big season, I think, to really cement his place there in Oklahoma, and I don't think they're going to have it. I think they're going to struggle. 3 of their first 5 games are super, super hard. It doesn't get a whole lot easier, ending with Florida, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Missouri. I mean, Missouri's not as intimidating as some of those teams, but I just think it's going to be a rough year for Oklahoma. I think that Mateer is going to have to make a giant leap forward passing if they're going to prove me wrong, and I just don't see him doing that.
So last year, obviously you watched the game. I watched the game too. Oklahoma, I thought their defense looked scary good. And then it looked that way, and it looked as scary as it did that night a couple other times throughout the season. But then as the season progressed, Bryce Underwood, freshman struggles. But do you credit that the offensive struggles by Michigan in that game more to what they were able to kind of scheme up defensively? Or is that more just, hey, this is a freshman quarterback's first real true brutal road test? What did you make of that?
I came away from that game very, very upset because I didn't know. They didn't let Underwood do anything that game. They barely let him throw. That was what made me very upset. I thought going into that game, okay, this is a test. We're going to at least see what we got. And we left that, and I was like, I still don't know what we have because it was such a pathetic game plan. They just ran it every play. They barely let him throw it, and it made the defense look great. It made him look unbelievable. But when you're playing a guy that isn't allowed to throw it, that doesn't have a QB coach, I don't know if you can really credit them that much. Will the defense at Oklahoma look good against Bryce Underwood this year again? It might. And I think we'll at least get to see Underwood sling it, though, where last year we really didn't even get to see him tested.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I didn't even kind of think about that part of it. But yeah, I mean, Butter Knives really kind of tucked his tail, and just it seemed like the game plan was, let's not get beat by more than 2 scores.
Yeah, it was
let's
pathetic.
keep it competitive on the scoreboard. Marsh, I'll kick it over to you. What do you got on Boomer Sooners?
Yeah, Ryan alluded to John Mateer kind of falling off a little bit. At one point, he broke his thumb and came back post surgery like 17 days later. Didn't look the same since then. I actually was doing a little bit of research too, because this is his throwing hand. Obviously, the thumb is the most important appendage, we'll say. I guess it's not a finger, the thumb is the thumb, but the thumb is the most important piece to gripping the football and throwing the spiral. And I think when you look at what that rebuilding process looks like, even after the bone completely fuses with the screws in his hand, oftentimes you lose a little bit of dexterity and feel. You have to alter your release. He was throwing a lot more sidearm post-surgery. John Mateer is not this mechanically sound quarterback as is, and then you throw this wrinkle into the mix. I think we saw that he wasn't the same after that. When I look at really their schedule, to Ryan's point, he's going to get a test right out of the gate September 12th in the Big House. Michigan hasn't been as great as 5 years ago, but it's still a real tough test, and that's one of the hardest places to play. And Ryan's favorite song, Mr. Brightside, will be blaring. Then you get September 26th at Georgia, and then you get Texas the following week. Or, excuse me, I think there's a bye in between there. But this schedule does them no favors. I think Brent Venables is great from a defensive side of the ball. They've got a lot of pieces in place on the defensive unit. They should still be very stout on that side. However, when I look at the team overall, the offensive line, they have experience. They haven't really shown that they can be elite yet. Defensive depth becomes a major issue as well, and we know what injuries and kind of rotations and things like that can do. Honestly, one of OU's best players is Tate Sandell, their kicker. The guy was 7 for 7 from 50 plus last year, all SEC selection. I was kind of pissed when I did a little research on this that he actually uses the instep of his foot like a traditional soccer kick instead of toe bashing, because I think Toe Bash Tate could be one of the best nicknames in college football this season. I just don't see this team elevating to the level that Boomer Sooner would like to see. The fact Vegas put their win total at 7.5, it kind of tells you a lot based on their schedule and what they think. 3,500 to win the Natty, plus 1,300 to win the SEC championship. All of these odds are telling me that Vegas lacks the confidence as well in Boomer Sooner. So I think Mateer is going to have to get back to being himself. Can he do that with titanium screws in his throwing hand? We'll have to find out. But for me, I'm just not sold on them being championship contenders in the SEC, let alone in the national title race. But Casey, I'd be interested to see, we've talked a lot about some of these schedules, and Oklahoma obviously has a gauntlet too. And based on where their pricing is from Vegas, I'd be interested to hear what your take is on a Boomer Sooner. Are you kind of with Ryan and I that you think it'll be a little bit more lackluster, underwhelming, or are you a little bit more bullish on the Sooners?
I'm bullish on Brent Venables, and I'm bullish on the culture and the makeup of what this team is. I am very bearish on their results this year that I'm forecasting. I just think that schedule is so brutal. You guys both hit on it, but 3 out of your first 5 games away from home against the likes of Michigan, Georgia, and Texas, 3 blue bloods in the sport. That's an impossible ask. It does help that you're leaning on the defensive side of the ball to kind of stabilize you, and it does help that you've got a 5th or 6th year quarterback that is really a gamer that you can count on to not panic, not crumble in big spots. After you get through those 3, that initial gauntlet of 3 out of 5 against Michigan, Texas, and Georgia, you still got A&M on the schedule. You still got some, I think, some very losable games. You got to go to Gainesville and you got to play John Summerall the last month of the season. So he's had 8-9 games worth of seasoning to get that team right in the Gators. And then you get Ole Miss, Trinidad Chambliss, and Kalon Lacey coming to town. Then you go, and then you have A&M, Marcel Reed, and A&M fighting for a playoff spot there in that last month of the season. Between the first 3 out of 5 and the last 3 out of 4, it's just, that's 6 losable games. Like, I think this could be a really, really good team that ends up 7-5 or 6-6, right? Like a team that would be maybe the second best team in the ACC to Miami. But they're 6-6 in the SEC, and because they're going on the road to Michigan, they're going on the road to Georgia. They get Ole Miss and A&M at home, and they go on the road to Gainesville. They play Texas in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Like, just brutal ask of a pretty good program. I do think they'll win some of those games. I really do. I think they can beat Michigan again. I think they could beat Georgia. I think they could beat Texas. I think they could win any game on their schedule. I just don't think they're going to win enough of them to really be a true factor come the end of the season in the CFP race. So I'm going to be short on Oklahoma this year as well. Just too much of an ask without any real dynamic playmakers like an Adrian Peterson, like a CD Lamb, like a real game changer at one of the skill positions. I don't see that on this roster. So I'm going to take the under and probably the CFP no on the Oklahoma Sooners. Okay. We are down to the final 2. This seems to be kind of the big 2 names at the top of everyone's SEC power ratings boards this year. We've got the Texas Longhorns and the Georgia Bulldogs. Flip a coin and kind of who you put 1 and who you put 2. Let's do the Georgia Bulldogs first. Another playoff team from last year. Lost a somewhat surprising game to Ole Miss down in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. Second straight year that they get a bye into the quarterfinal game, and they're the host against a team that comes off a first round playoff win. Year 1, it was Notre Dame who ended up getting to the national championship. Last year, it was Ole Miss who went on to lose their next game against Miami. But the Georgia Bulldogs still feel like very much at the tip of the spear in terms of the college football national landscape, but haven't gotten a win in the first 2 college football 12-team playoffs. They appear to have a scary front 7 on defense this year. They got Gunnar Stockton coming back. They got Nate Frazier coming back. Everyone who I trust who talks about real offensive line play, the Cole Kublicks, the Josh Pates, those type of guys. Everyone seems to kind of put them, Phil Steele, in the kind of the top 3 to 5 offensive lines in the country this year. So if you look at their roster, it appears that the defensive backs may be a little bit susceptible to getting exposed on the back end. They gave up some big plays last year, namely against like Ole Miss and Tennessee. So got to shore up the back end of that defense. And then out wide on offense, the wide receiver room, very little to be able to point to in terms of proven production at the SEC level, at Power 4 level, at the wide receiver room for Georgia. This appears to be another team that's going to really lean heavily on creating chaos on defense and then just good, sound, kind of fundamental pro-style offense, pound the rock type football on offense. Ryan, I came to you first on Oklahoma. I'll come to Marsh first to talk about the Bull Puppies in Athens, Georgia. Marsh, what do you got on Georgia?
Yeah, listen, we talked briefly at the front of this SEC show about how the SEC has got a lot of parity to it now. There's not really the perennial heavy hitter like when Georgia was winning the national championship every year. It felt like Alabama under Nick Saban. It's just different, and the vibes are different in the SEC, and I think it's even bled into Georgia. I think Georgia is one of those teams that the NIL has just kind of taken away from the Bamas and the Georgias of the world, because they used to do it under the table and get all the big bulldozers, and the offensive line is still there for Georgia, but now you don't really see a lot of like the elite edge players, or Nate Frazier's a great running back, but we haven't really seen like the Todd Gurley's of the world back there. Gunnar Stockton's a good quarterback. He's not Matt Stafford. There's there's different aspects to this, I think, especially when you get to the top of the SEC, where some teams are doing it better than others with the NIL. I think Kirby Smart has done a great job, obviously. He's a fantastic coach and obviously won a lot of championships. But we're just not seeing the same elite level of talent across all these different positions like we used to. And you're seeing it more in pockets at Georgia. I think their offensive line is going to be outstanding. You alluded to that, Nard. Gunnar Stockton and Nate Frazier. We talked about Trinidad Chambliss and Kawan Lacey, right? And having that experience, having the QB and running back production back, knowing the offense, veteran offensive line, all of that really bodes well for the Bulldogs. I think especially when you're talking about the SEC as a whole and having tough games week in, week out. But who's your star wide receiver? There's no Lad McConkey. There's no AJ Green. Like even like Colby Young last year, you just don't see the same elite level of talent on this team. The Bulldogs will be great. Don't get me wrong. I don't know though. I look at SEC championship at plus 260. I'm pretty bearish on that. They're a pro style offense versus a lot of these teams are kind of the, you know, high tempo spread that we see that are going to score a lot of points. Can Georgia keep up in some of these games will be the question. So all in all, I don't think I have Georgia as a favorite. We'll save that for the next team. But I do think they'll be the Georgia Bulldogs. They'll win 9, 10, 11 games and probably come up just short in the playoff.
Yeah, Ryan, you look at their slate, it's not the most difficult. It's nowhere near like an Oklahoma type schedule. You're not going to sneak through an SEC season, you know, with a 9-game schedule and not have some tough games. But I think theirs are a little bit more scattered throughout the season and not the most difficult road slate that I've ever seen. But, you know, if they got to go to Alabama, they got to go to Ole Miss. So, two tough games, two teams that beat them but at certain points last year. So what do you make of Georgia?
I think Georgia is actually going to be just quietly dominant this year. They don't have a ton of huge games. I think they get back to what Kirby Smart had them doing a few years ago. I think their front seven on defense is going to be great. They're going to dominate teams. I think their offensive line is going to be awesome. They're going to be able to run it down teams' throats. I think that's what they want to do. I think that'll open up the passing game. I think they'll have a receiver or two that we don't know about yet that really emerges as a star. I look at their over-under at 9.5, and I thought that was a little high. And then I looked at their schedule, and I thought about how good I really think they're going to be this year with that defense. And I think that's an easy over. I think they just got to really win one of the 3 games, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss. And I think they might win all 3 of those games. I might even get suckered into betting them undefeated regular season at plus 600.
I was looking at that too.
I haven't made that bet. I don't know if that would even be smart or if it would just be a better way to do it, just betting on them to just win against those 3 games I just mentioned. But I like Kirby. I think they really, really get it rolling this year. I think it's going to be boring like a few years ago. You wouldn't even be able to watch more than 8 minutes of a Georgia game. They would be up 28-0, and you just flip it off. I think they're going to have a lot of games like this, especially their first 3 games of the season. Tennessee State, Western Kentucky, Arkansas, they might win those first 3 games 200-0.
It's funny. I've got 2 buddies here. Dixon, who you guys will be seeing more of on the Nard Dawg Sports channel in the coming weeks and months. But Dixon and my buddy Mike Shadid, who I used to work with, they're both. Mike graduated from Georgia, and Dixon has been a lifelong Georgia Bulldogs fan. But I've been, texting with them this time of year. We always kind of get back in our group chat and kick around different college football takes, who we're liking, who we're not. But we were actually just texting this morning, and Mike made a good point. He's like, look, if Georgia goes out and buys a Cam Coleman instead of him going to Texas, I think you could say we're like an odds-on favorite to win the national title, right? With a weapon like him. But instead, he goes to Texas, right? And it's just Georgia. They did go out and get Zachariah Branch last year, who I loved. Fast little kind of like slot and speedy receiver that made some plays, yards after catch type guy. So I like Zachariah Branch, but outside of him, it feels like just the last 2 or 3 years, they just don't have since Lad McConkey, and they had George Pickens back in those years when they were winning national titles, and they had Brock Bowers, who's one of the best tight ends in the NFL, and they still got Lawson Lucky. They still got a good tight end room. They've got good running backs, but it's just there's something about them. It feels like you look at their regular season last year, they win and they score in the 40s and win on the road against Tennessee. They score in the 40s and beat Ole Miss at home in that crazy game early in the season last year. They've been able to score some points, but there's just something that feels like it's missing. Like when Alabama came in and played them, I believe that was like the last weekend of September. You had Oregon, Penn State on one screen, you had Alabama, Georgia on the other screen, and Georgia felt like Penn State, like just couldn't kind of get it clicking on offense, just couldn't quite get the ball moving with any kind of consistency and rhythm. And I think we may see some of that again this year, but I love this defense. I think this is a front seven that is probably the most comparable front seven we've seen from Georgia since those national championship teams. The Roquan Smith, the Jalen Carter, those type of just studs. And it seems like every time you look in the headlines now on the NFL contract extensions, it's Georgia defensive players just getting absolute bags dropped on them, right? And maybe this crop of Georgia defensive guys on this roster this year is going to be kind of that next wave of Georgia defensive studs on the D line and at the edge and the off ball linebacker room that are the next studs in the NFL. That's kind of what they need, because I think offensively they're going to be fairly pedestrian in terms of all these top 10 teams. They don't have the same kind of weapons as the Ohio State, the Texas, the Oregons, Miamis of the world. So I think defense, good, smart quarterback play, pound the rock, and just kind of win by being smarter and tougher than other teams. But I like this Georgia team a lot for sure. What anything stand out in terms of, national title odds, plus 850, SEC championship, plus 260, to get back to the college football playoff, they're minus 240. That's pretty significant juice, but not crazy given the schedule we talked about. They'd be plus 185 to miss the playoffs. Over under 9.5. The over is minus 180. So that's probably going to jump to 10.5 here soon, it looks like. The under 9.5 would be plus 150. And then Ryan mentioned to achieve an undefeated regular season, that would pay 6-1 currently.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit of like plus 260 is SEC champs, 850 in the Natty, minus 240 CFP. None of that sounds juicy enough for me to bite. I think over 9.5, to your point, it is minus 180, but the fact they play 12 games and we talked about their schedule and where their experience lies, which is in quarterback room, running back room, offensive line room, front seven on defense. When you're built in the trenches and you've got experience in the backfield like that, you match that to their schedule, they could lose 2 games, but if they do, it's one of Oklahoma, Bama, Ole Miss, like maybe Florida. I struggle to really get in there and say they're going to lose 2 of those games on this schedule. So I love over 9.5. I also feel like this Georgia team, again, is kind of ho-hum. Ryan alluded to they're just almost boring in the way that they win, which is not a bad thing, right? You want to be boring to some aspect and win in blowouts every week. For me, I think it's over 9.5. I would probably be staying away from the rest because I think the Texas Longhorns are the favorite for a reason. The Cam Coleman take from your buddy is actually super interesting because I would agree wholeheartedly. Had they gotten the big name in the portal at the wide receiver position or maybe even at some other positions, this pendulum swings more in favor of them being national title favorites versus what maybe like 3rd, 4th, 5th on the list at this point. Yep. So I like Texas more than anything, and I think that brings us to our last and final team in the SEC here, the Texas Longhorns, old Steve Sarkisian. Casey, I know you alluded to this too. You like Texas. Tell us why. What about them do you like?
Pretty much everything. I'm staking my claim on Texas. I think Texas plus 670 to win the national title. I'd love to get that more in like plus 750. I think that's probably more the right value, but close to 7-1. I like Texas to win the national championship. I have a ton of respect for Sarkisian. Last year, you look at their season, they had a tough kind of opening slate. They go on the road to Ohio State. They go on the road to Florida. And this is before Florida's season really kind of falls completely apart. They had one loss and could still kind of play for a playoff spot. So Florida had not given up on Billy Napier in that season yet. So Texas loses that game as well. I think Arch certainly showed some first-year starting quarterback learning curve, had some challenges with accuracy and just kind of finding the open receivers, going through his progressions. But, I mean, it's impossible to say this given what Joe Burrow did in 2019 compared to his first year in 2018. But I'm looking at like a second-year jump in the same atmosphere as what Burrow did at LSU in terms of what I expect out of Arch this year. I think the guy's a really talented quarterback. It's become popular and fun to just shit on the kid and say, you know, he's a bust. He's only getting this much praise and hype because of his name. And maybe he's getting a little bit more than he should, but I think he's a really talented kid. I like him. I think every time I hear him talk in the media, he's very down to earth. They're just a good, solid, salt to the earth people. I love that they brought in Cam Coleman. I love Ryan Wingo. They got Emmett Mosley, so they got weapons galore. They can pound the rock if they need to with two transfer running backs in Raleek Brown from Arizona State and Hollywood Smothers from NC State. They got defensive talent. Colin Simmons, probably a top 10 to top 15 edge rush type pick in the NFL draft next year. I love this roster. I love that they got Will Muschamp back on the defensive side of the ball, calling that defense. Sark running the offense. Arch at the helm, weapons galore, offensive line, defensive line. Like, what do you not like about the Longhorns? I'm hook 'em this year. I think they beat Ohio State in week 2. And look, I'm an Ohio State fan. We got to go on the road, but Ohio State beating them shock me? No. But you don't win every big game. We beat them last year. We go on the road this year. They got the more experienced roster, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So I think Texas makes a statement in week 2. They beat the Buckeyes. Then looking at the rest of their schedule, I like their runway to, I'm not calling undefeated, but they go on the road to Knoxville. They get Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout in Dallas. They host Gators in a revenge game. They host Ole Miss. They host Mississippi State. It's right there in the middle of the season. They don't play anything but a neutral game from basically Tennessee on September 26th. They don't go back into a true road environment until November 7th when they go play at Missouri. Not the toughest road game. The end of the season is tough. At Missouri, at LSU, Arkansas, kind of a nice little break there between LSU, and then at Texas A&M on Black Friday to end the season. If they beat Ohio State, I very much see them getting to 8-0, 9-0, and then going into their last 3 games at LSU and at Texas A&M. I don't think it's crazy. I like Texas to go undefeated, I think, more than I like Georgia to go undefeated for sure. So that's where I'm at on Texas. Ryan, I'll kick it over to you. And I'm interested to hear your take on my take that the Longhorns are going to beat the Buckeyes in week 2.
I disagree. I think Ohio State wins that game. I think your take is, I guess it just shows how high you are in Texas, but I think that's almost crazy to say with Ohio State on the schedule, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, LSU, and Texas A&M. I think those are all games they could lose. I think their offensive line might struggle a little bit, and I'm definitely lower on Texas than Vegas is, than Casey is, and probably than most people in the country are. I don't know. I think they could struggle. I think their wide receivers are obviously awesome. There's no excuse for Manning at all. If he can't get it done with Wingo and Coleman, who transferred in, he's not going to be able to get it done at the next level. So I do think that they will have some success on offense, but overall, I think their schedule is too brutal. I think Ohio State beats them. I think that's a brutal 4-game stretch with Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, Ole Miss. I don't know. I do like Sark. I do somewhat want to defend him. A lot of people are saying that you can't win the big one. It's like, yeah, well, either could Cignetti, either could Ryan Day, either could Harbaugh. Those are the last 3 national championship winners. So I hate that argument. He can't win the big one. It's like, well, no one can until they do. So I just don't think it's going to be.
Kirby, too.
What was
Kirby
that?
before that. Kirby won the 2 before that. Everyone said he couldn't get past Saban, couldn't win the big one, and then won back-to-back national titles.
Yeah, and no one even said it about Cignetti just because there wasn't even enough time for people to say that. I don't think it's going to be this year. I think it's just too brutal of a schedule. I think Ohio State's defensive line might really rattle Manning early, and I like the Buckeyes to go into Austin and get the W.
So would you call for, do you like the no on the missed playoff at plus 155?
No, because for a season-long bet like that, that's just not enough juice. I don't have enough conviction to lay something like that and wait 20 weeks.
Fair enough. Marsh, what about you? The Longhorns feel like they would be kind of in that same realm of teams and fan bases you really have a disdain for. So, but Texas, Ohio State, that's a huge Saturday night game, that week 2 of the season. Do you think Texas gets it done against the Buckeyes this year, and then are they off to the races, or are you more on Ryan's side where going to be a tough go of it and they're going to struggle a little bit?
Yeah, listen, I'm just glad that the Big Ten has scheduled such great out of conference games. We look historically, and it's just been kind of dog shit. So I love seeing the Buckeyes take on Texas. I thought that was a great game last season. I think Ohio State is the circled game for Texas, and it's early in the season. If they can beat the Buckeyes, I'm bullish on most of the overs for Texas. If they lose to Ohio State, I honestly am probably flipping the other way. I do like Texas to win the SEC. I like their over on wins. I like them to make the college football playoff. I don't think the odds to win it all are juicy enough for me. Although if they do get to the playoff, they will have had a very proven track record with this schedule. Has Arch taken that next step that you talked about? The weapons are insane. This is Sark's best roster he's ever had. The fact that they got Cam Coleman in the portal, they've still got Ryan Wingo and Emmett Mosley, and then you go out, you get Raleek Brown, Hollywood Smothers. Listen, as a local Raleigh guy, I watched Hollywood Smothers last year. I was talking about how this guy is really good and how he's not going to be a Wolfpack member this season. I was exactly right on that because the guy is electric. Both him and Raleek Brown have the home run hitting speed. They're those fun running backs to watch where every time they touch the ball, you don't know if they're going to break it or not. You team that up with Sark. You team that up with Arch Manning and an RPO. You got Wingo and Cam Coleman on the outside. How do you not look at this offense and say, if Arch Manning is who we thought he is supposed to be, that they are not the best offense in college football? This will be a big storyline throughout the season, and it's going to start in College Game Day week 2 against the Buckeyes. I've heard a lot of chatter about the Texas fans too. They may not like me saying this, but supposedly Texas games are just kind of a social outing. You know, there's a lot of hot blondes and cowboy boots that just show up for the drinks and the social media posts and kind of throw out a bunch of hookums out there. I couldn't believe when I heard that recently. I'd be interested to see if that's a real thing and what Matthew McConaughey has to say about that, or Glenn Powell for that matter. But I like Texas a lot this season. You mentioned it, Nard. They don't have holes anywhere. They are over 9.5 wins is plus 120. I get positive odds for what I think could be the best offense in college football. Probably number 2 right behind the Miami Hurricanes, but the schedule is telling why the odds are priced that way. What we're not talking about is the end of that schedule at LSU November 14th, then Arkansas, and then Texas A&M on a short week. They play 3 games, 2 of which are on the road at LSU and Texas A&M in the 13-day span. That's hard to do as 19, 20, 21-year-old athletes. Pros, you know, they've got a little bit more experience with those quick turnarounds and kind of how they're doing the practice schedule. But that's really what it's going to come down to. I think if they get past the Buckeyes, I think they beat Tennessee. I think they beat Oklahoma. I think they beat Florida. I think Ole Miss will be a good one, but they should ultimately win that game. They're looking really good, but they come into this little tripping hazard, as I'll call it, at the end of the season with three games in 13 days and going to Death Valley and Kyle Field will be interesting to see.
I wanted to kick it over to Ryan since I think he is uniquely qualified to kind of comment on the Texas fan base. I visited Ryan a couple times when he lived in Austin, and we would go out downtown and you would see Longhorns, and there was obviously a good amount of like Longhorn fan presence, but to me it never felt as feverish and as obsessed with the Longhorns as like Columbus does about the Buckeyes. And they're both true cities with major college football programs within the city. Is that fair, Ryan, or is Texas every bit as Longhorn obsessed as Columbus is Buckeye obsessed?
No, overall, as a city, you're definitely right from what I saw. It's more of a transient city, Austin. So there's just a lot more people just not from Austin. Where Columbus, it seems like almost everyone has a tie to Ohio. And you go out here on a Saturday. I mean, it is, you see 100% Buckeye stuff. It's crazy. I always joke that that's just 100% of people's wardrobe is in Columbus is just Ohio State shit. Where in Austin, you go out on a Saturday, you could go to bars where there's just as much other SEC team stuff as Texas. There's clearly a ton of Texas stuff out, but it's not as dense, as thick. And I only went to one Texas game, but I definitely experienced what Max mentioned earlier, that it was not a very wild crowd at all. It was an opening game of the year. It was a top 25 team coming in. I think it was UL Monroe a few years ago. They were like 24.
No, it was Billy Napier the year before he went to Florida. He took Louisiana. It was like Louisiana. I think they just go by Louisiana now, the Raging Cajuns.
Okay, so it was Louisiana. Yeah, it was, not a huge game, but they were like 24th in the country, first game of the year. I went thinking it was going to be just a great atmosphere, and it was anything but that. I was very disappointed. It was like 110 degrees, so hard to get too wild in that temperature. But it's the first game of the year. You go to a Buckeyes game, doesn't matter if Akron's coming to town week one. People are fired up, and it's crazy. Yeah, maybe the third quarter, people start dipping out when it's 52-0 or whatever. But it just never got crazy in Austin the way I really thought it would. But I also never went to a huge game. When I was there, Alabama came to town a few times, and they had night games, and the atmosphere looked incredible. So I do think it's one of those kind of a front-running crowd where they will really show up for the big games. And I think they've proven that.
For sure.
The other thing with Texas too is we didn't talk a whole lot about is the defense too. With Colin Simmons, I think we briefly mentioned him, but he had 12 sacks, 15.5 tackles for loss. You bring in Rasheem Biles from Pitt to replace Anthony Hill, but it's going to be interesting to see because we talk about that Buckeyes game again. Julian Sand kind of struggled against those top tier defenses last season. Is he going to take the leap? And we'll get into that next week in the Big Ten episode. But if Colin Simmons is wreaking havoc off the edge, is this something that we see sustainably for the rest of the season too? Because if the defense starts getting humming, then all of a sudden that 6-10 national championship value becomes a little bit more enticing. From a picks perspective, I look at Texas. For me, it's over 9.5 plus 120, SEC champ plus 310. Both of those are probably more juicy odds in the SEC than we've seen for most of these teams.
Do you guys think I'm crazy to call for the year 2 Joe Burrow type pop for Arch? And do you guys view Arch as the quarterback that'll kind of separate himself and be the clear-cut number 1 pick in the draft next year? Or do you think he may struggle again and be kind of polarizing, mixed bag of opinions from the NFL scouts and more of like a fringe top 10, top 15 type pick next year?
I think Arch does take the next step. I think there's too many things surrounding him to combine with his talent to not do so. Obviously, he's a Manning. There's a pedigree there. Having a coach like Sark in front of you, we saw the struggles that Arch had up front last year, and then he absolutely came on just with a torrid pace at the end of the season, especially in that bowl game. If we look at his trajectory, everything logically says this is what we expected from Arch Manning is what we will see this season. Now, if that doesn't happen, let's say Buckeyes week 2, that defense we know is a tough unit always. Let's say he struggles immensely. All of a sudden, this conversation becomes a lot different because he's surrounded by too much. And he has too much talent to not be wildly successful. If he's not, we're talking about one of the most overhyped players. If he is, we're talking first or second overall pick more than likely. For Arch Manning, I feel like this could swing one of two ways in drastic fashion. I'm on the side of I think Arch makes the leap. I don't know if it's Joe Burrow-esque, but I do think we could see, I would even say like Andrew Luck type elevation there.
Ryan, you like Arch? Team's going to be marching for Arch.
I am going to take the other side and say there is a better chance he has a Drew Aller type year where he goes into the year thinking he's going to be number one and falls. I don't think he'll actually fall out of the top 10 and be like Drew Aller, but I do not think he has that Joe Burrow pop at all. I mean, that's one of the greatest seasons in college football history, if not the greatest for a quarterback. I just don't see it happening. I don't see them having that success. I see a few losses for them, starting with the Buckeyes. And I will say I do not think he will be the number one draft pick. I think another QB will emerge and take that spot.
All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for the SEC. We'll be back next week with more college football preview coverage. We're getting into the best conference in college football, the 3-time defending national championship conference, the Big Ten, home of Ryan's Michigan Wolverines, home of my Ohio State Buckeyes. The bottom of the Big Ten is probably not quite as good. The middle is about the same as the SEC, maybe a little bit off, a little bit weaker, but we'll be back with the Big Ten. Ryan, Max, have a great weekend. I'm getting more and more fired up the more football we're talking here, boys. Any closing thoughts?
Ready for the big boy conference next?
Yeah, I can't wait to play devil's advocate next week. And obviously, I am extremely excited about football with all this talk. It's getting me a little horned up.
Yes, sir. All right, guys. All right, well, that wraps it up. Peace.
That's the show. Now you know. This is how the real ones roll. Big things, good night, see you down the road on the Nard Dawg Sports Show.